So I was gonna do a whole video on the OGL 1.2 thing. I had like 7 pages of script with like references and shit. But then I just kind of decided to throw most of it out because there are a lot of people with a lot more knowledge of IP law than me going way more in depth into this thing than I really care to. So I don't feel like I would really be contributing anything by doing that. So I decided to just limit my comments on the issue to a few key points, including one really big point which doesn't seem to be getting as much attention as it probably should, and is likely the one that I used in the thumbnail and title for this video. So first up, they are very much not backing down on their assertion that they can and will deauthorize the Open Game License version 1.0a. Let me just read that for you real quick. Notice of deauthorization of OGL 1.0a. The Open Game License 1.0a is no longer an authorized license. This means that you may not use that version of the OGL or any prior version to publish SRD content after effective date. It does not mean that any content previously published under that version needs to be updated to this license. Any previously published content remains licensed under whichever version of the OGL was in effect when you published that content. So let's just assume that they do actually have the authority to do this, which a lot of people with more knowledge of law than I have seem to doubt. The big question here is, how does that affect derivative works? Because based on this language, Pathfinder will still be licensed under the version 1.0a Open Game License. So will I still be able to publish a Pathfinder product after effective date? Because Pathfinder is still licensed under the Open Game License 1.0a, which says that I can. Because if that is the case, if I can continue to publish under the Open Game License 1.0a because I am making a derivative work of another work that is published under the Open Game License 1.0a, then there's really nothing stopping, pretty much everyone from just using an already published SRD5 product as a backdoor to continue publishing under the OGL 1.0a. And I cannot imagine that Wizards of the Coast have not considered that possibility and taken steps to prevent it. But now for the weird thing, the thing that a lot of people were demanding, but nobody thought they were actually going to do, and spoiler alert, they still didn't. The core D&D mechanics, which are located at pages 56 through 104, 254 through 260, and 258 through 259 of this System Reference Documents 5.1, but not the examples used on those pages, are licensed to you under the Creative Commons License 4.0 International. This means that Wizards is not placing any limitation on how you use that content. So once again, I just want to remind everyone that game mechanics are a thing that they 100% unambiguously cannot copyright and have no legal grounds to prevent you from using. But moving on, the core D&D mechanics located on such and such page are licensed under the Creative Commons license. Not the content on those pages, the core D&D mechanics on those pages. Legal text needs to be interpreted very literally. So what are the core D&D mechanics? Is it just the abstract stuff, which, as I said, cannot be copyrighted and they cannot prevent you from using? Or does it also include gray area things like terminology? Or copyrightable material like the actual text that's on those pages, excluding the descriptions which they specifically excluded? And for that matter, what is a core D&D mechanic? Because you are likely assuming that it's all of the rules on those pages, but it doesn't say all of the mechanics on those pages, it says the core D&D mechanics on those pages. So, there's nothing really stopping them from saying that the grappler feat is not a core mechanic, that the equipment lists are not a core mechanic, that inspiration is not a core mechanic, that anything they don't want to be a core mechanic is not a core mechanic. They do not have control over the license, but they have control over what they say they are releasing under the license. So until such time as they clarify what they mean there, ideally by releasing a separate document which is fully licensed under the Creative Commons license, I'm just going to have to assume that this is one of those oh yeah, we can totally own game rules, but it's okay because we're letting you use them type things that they like to do, because Wizards of the Coast are and always have been somewhat heavily reliant on people just assuming that they have more authority than they actually do. And now the biggest issue, and if you are thinking, excuse you, the biggest issue is the attempted deauthorization of the OGL 1.0a, you are wrong, because this is what they are using to justify the attempted deauthorization of the OGL 1.0a. No hateful content or conduct. You will not include content in your licensed works that is harmful, discriminatory, illegal, obscene, or harassing, or engage in conduct that is harmful, discriminatory, illegal, obscene, or harassing. We have the sole right to decide what conduct or content is hateful, and you covenant that you will not contest any such determination via any suit or other legal action. So yeah, bold words from a company that, just a couple months ago had a little bit of a racist space monkey scandal. So basically this is the, not only are we not going to be racist anymore, we are now going to protect the entire community from hateful and harmful content section of the license. And it is definitely worth noting here that they packed a lot of stuff under hateful content. A thing which, of course, is objectively bad. Like, if I'm criticizing that, that must mean that I am in favor of hateful content, is what they want you to think. And so let's examine that, because there are a lot of concepts here to unpack. First, and most importantly, this is an official term in the license, which means that violating this term can be used as grounds to terminate the license. And not just termination, immediate termination. This is one of the most strictly enforced terms in the entire license. Second, Wizards of the Coast LLC gives themselves sole authority to determine what does or does not violate this term, which you are not allowed to contest. And third, it applies to content and conduct, and there is no specification here in this document about what kind of conduct is to be taken in consideration here. So even if there is no issue with the actual content, they can presumably just terminate the license if you just do anything they don't like. But, let's dive into this big old pile of very ambiguous and very subjective terminology, which is always a very good thing to see in a legal document. So the definition of illegal is kind of obvious, unless you take into consideration that what is and is not illegal is going to vary from country to country, state to state, county to county, and so on, in which case it becomes a bit complicated, and they should really be specifying illegal in what territory. But what is harmful or discriminatory content or conduct? They obviously want you to think that it is like overtly bigoted or exclusionary things, like publishing a book with racist space monkeys, or going on a rant about how women shouldn't be allowed to play D&D because they're just pretending to like it now that it's popular and they were mean to you in high school. But as I said, they can interpret this however they want. Like, I have said a lot of negative things about Wizards of the Coast here on the YouTube. Is that harmful conduct? I am specifically speaking out against an organization and sometimes its employees, and on occasion, I am specifically doing that with the goal of hurting their business. Like, I was advocating for boycotting their products. That is advocating for harm to Wizards of the Coast. And you might be thinking, well, obviously they don't mean that, and how do you know? How do you know what they mean when the terms of the agreement literally say it means whatever we say it means? And how about harassing content? Because a lot of people sure have been harassing Wizards of the Coast lately about this whole OGL thing going on. And, wouldn't it be great if every third-party publisher suddenly found themselves in a position of being able to have their license terminated for harassing or criticizing Wizards of the Coast? And once again, you might be thinking, well, yeah, they could do that, but they probably won't. And once again, Are you sure? Because it really seems like they silenced everyone they had any legal hold over during the recent OGL scandal. And if they are already doing it when they have the authority to, we have no reason to assume that they wouldn't do it after giving themselves an incredibly wide authority to. But now for the big one, the most ambiguous term in this whole damn document, the one which notably has had its legal definition debated continuously for over a century. What is obscene? Once again, the answer to that question in this context is whatever the Wizards of the Coast LLC says is obscene, or rather, whoever's job it ends up being to look over these things decides is obscene. Because I've been talking about this like these decisions will be big corporate ones, when in reality it'll likely be just a handful of overworked people who need to address complaints about third-party products, most likely without even having the content made available to them to review themselves before making a decision. So it's not going to be a corporate decision, it's going to be some random person at Wizards of the Coast who makes the decision that you are not legally allowed to contest. And once again, you might be thinking, well, yeah, but I'm sure they're only going to invoke that for content which is objectively obscene. And what you actually mean when you say that is content that you consider obscene. Because as I said, that is not even close to an objective term. Just for example, and mind you, I have no concrete source on this, but the rumors floating around are that Wizards of the Coast were very unhappy with the Book of Erotic Fantasy, and it was denied a D20 system license. And they probably would have denied it an open game license if, there was some kind of term in the open game license that would allow them to terminate the license for any content that they considered obscene. Because here is a bit of a hot take for you. There is nothing obscene in this book. It is just a book that maturely discusses sex and sex-related topics in a fantasy world, and includes some associated game content. This is not obscene. This is not pornographic. This book was sold in big box bookstores. The first time I ever encountered it was on the little RPG shelf at Borders Books. You can buy this book right now on DriveThruRPG, and it is not listed as an adult product. But here's the thing, you would absolutely not be able to publish this on the DM's Guild, because of the direct references to sexual acts and sexual activities, as well as the female presenting nipples, which are in some of the photographs. And as I've said before, we should really be looking at the DM's Guild as a new minimum for what we can expect from a restrictive license from Wizards of the Coast. So we can assume that, like in the DM's Guild, you will not be able to have any explicit references to sex or sexual acts, and no lady nipples. And I know that the content guidelines for the DM's Guild says that no nipples are allowed regardless of presentation, but there is a 0% chance that they are enforcing that. If you don't believe me, just go on the DM's Guild and search Barbarian. Which brings me to my very next point. The Wizards having the sole authority to decide what does and does not violate this term also means that they can basically just terminate the license for any content or creators that they don't like, but also that they don't have to enforce any of the rules for the content or creators that they do like. As with the no nipples rule on the DM's Guild, it clearly says in the guidelines no nipples on anyone of any gender, but it only gets enforced when those nipples are female presenting. The weird ambiguous language here only sets a maximum of what they can enforce, not what they are required to enforce. They don't have to enforce any of it. And right about now you might be thinking, isn't this the kind of vague language and arbitrary enforcement of moral concepts that has historically been used to suppress queer content and the content of queer creators? And yeah, it's exactly like that. Except, it can apply to whoever they don't like. Like, here's a fun question for you. Is anyone who creates any kind of explicit adult content not authorized to use the OGL 1.2? Because that is almost certainly considered obscene conduct by, some asshole at Wizards of the Coast. Because remember, the conduct is in no way specified as having to be in any way related to the production or promotion of the licensed content. So let's just say hypothetically that I were a third-party publisher, and Wizards of the Coast found out that I was, doing something like drawing erotic clown art on the internet. Could they just use that as an excuse to terminate the license on all of my products because they felt that my conduct unrelated to the publishing of these products was obscene? Or once again, right here where I am now harassing Wizards of the Coast by criticizing how they are giving themselves the authority to basically terminate licenses based on their subjective assessment of a creator's conduct. And it's not like I'm saying that they should be allowing pornographic content or anything. Psych! Yeah, that's actually exactly what I'm doing. I am sitting here and I am advocating for the right to create pornographic content for Dungeons and Dragons. And an actual open game license should allow for content of all levels and all types, and that should include adult content. And if you are sitting there trying to argue that there should never be adult content in Dungeons & Dragons, then congratulations, you are arguing that Dungeons & Dragons is for children. Because adults play this game too, and adults should have the ability to access or create adult materials if they desire to. And under the new OGL 1.2, doing either of those things could terminate your license. And I think it is important for us to remember here that Wizards of the Coast has never done anything because it was the right thing to do. They do things because that's what they think will be the most profitable at that moment. Hence why they have to keep putting out all these apologies. Right now, they are pretending to care about the community and inclusivity and safety, etc., because that is what the marketing team is telling them they need to say to smooth over all of the recent controversies they have created for themselves. Because they know that's what works. Because that's worked every single time for them in the past. Because people just go, oh, well, I'm sure Wizards of the Coast learned their lesson this time, and they won't pull any shit like this again. And then they do. That's the point I'm making here. They just keep doing it, and they will keep doing it because no one is holding them accountable. And thank you for watching, with extra special thanks to my Fight and Flail Snails, Samuel Gorski, Ranty Mulholland, and Toshirokuro. If you'd like to be cool like them, you can check out my Patreon, where you can get early access to videos and fun stuff that I make for the Patreon. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos which either myself or the cold heartless YouTube algorithm have lovingly selected for you, which I'm sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time.